this video in the series about requirements for a sustainable government and sustainable governance, focus on liability. And this is a very important and very critical principle that's almost never been talked about by politicians. One need to ask the question why. Because liability mean and imply that first of all there must be an accountability. So what is accountable? What is liability? Liability means to be legally obliged towards a person or entity in terms of your responsibilities. In terms of the Companies Act, there are many different versions on that. Focus on basically three types of liabilities. Ultra vires liabilities of directors of companies outside, based on loan agreements for repayment of such loans, for example. Secondly, liability for fraud and corruption. And here in this case, that is one of the liabilities that's rarely been executed. And I'm going to come back to that. Then the third liability is liability of negligence. So, for example, when you drive more than 60 kilometers and you hit somebody else in an accident, then you are liable for that, unless you are insured to cover that liability. Then the insurer will overtake the liability if you are not negligent in terms of drunk or incapacitated, for example. Now, the liability is a very important term because it implies a responsibility. It means you are not only answerable, what we call accountability, you're not only accountable, but you are also obliged, legally obliged in terms of the law. And the selective application of the law to prevent liability, we see very often at boards, specific public-private enterprises, specific in Namibia, where we have more than 100 public-private enterprises in different versions, some commercialized, half commercialized, all of them still owned by the government, 50% and more, and most of them, the shareholding is exclusively belonging to the government. Now, it very seldom happens in Namibia that directors of companies are being held liable. For example, in case of the SME Bank, that happened about 5 or 6, 7 years ago. Nobody has been charged legally in terms of the Companies Act, the board of directors of the SME Bank. Similar, one can also refer to other boards in Namibia that have been accused of fraud and corruption. And I regard fraud as a comprehensive term, or not a comprehensive term, a term that actually is part of corruption. Although fraud is more a financial term, much more sophisticated, a financial form of or manifestation of corruption. So, for example, the GIPF board, the Government Institutions Pension Fund board, there were huge, enormous corruption in Namibia of about 600 million, where funds been allocated to business people without business plans, some with very mediocre business plans, to in order to encourage black economic empowerment based on the skin color of a person, and none of that have been found guilty, none have been jailed, none have been charged for corruption. So that liability in terms of fraud and negligence have not been executed. And there are several others boards that even involved in corruption, like NAMCOR, Namibian Petroleum Company or Corporation, and also the Namibia Institute of Pathology, for example. We often see the mismanagement of funds in public-private enterprises. For example, also August 26, an agency of the National Defense Force, where that is also not, liability is not being applied. The Social Security Commission, first round of corruption involving Mr. Kandara in the early 2000s, receiving where the people, the management, and some of the board members of the Social Security Commission received kickbacks based on the insurance of money insured on behalf of the Social Security Commission by Mr. Kandara. Another example is the Abbott case, where one lawyer was found guilty with a penalty of 8,000 Namibian dollars. One deputy minister, Mr. Kapia, was found guilty with 60,000, and the chairman have been jailed. In the case of Air Namibia, that received recent, extensive bailouts over about 10 billion over a period since independence. That was after Air Namibia was run excellently, very excellent, just after independence and before independence, but it deteriorated once Mr. Francois, the CEO, left in the 90s. Now, it is clear that if one want to address corruption, and if one want a sustainable government and governance, then liability should definitely be a principle that's been applied. And also in UNESCO's principles of sustainable and good governance, as well as in the OECD, you will not find liability as a principle. The person's surname, in the case of Air Namibia, I remember now, it was Mr. Francois Pace. So liability is extremely important, because without the absence of liability, there's no penalty for people. And the opposite of liability is impunity, protection. So the more political decisions being enforced, the less you will see liability. So accountability, liability, and responsibility goes very well together. And accountability means answerability about positive and the negative aspects of reporting to a higher authority in terms of the obligations laid upon you or the responsibilities that you execute, and not just sugarcoating reports. So it is hopefully clear that although you get many different types of liability, also in financial terms, short-term liabilities, long-term liabilities, and so we focus here on the legal aspects of liability, the legal implications. So as a sustainable government and governance concept. Thank you very much.